Good afternoon, those of you who joined our geopolitical talks in Ukraine Crisis Media Center, both offline, the foreign journalists, Ukrainian journalists, and also online, and those of you who are going to watch the recording on YouTube. Today we decided to discuss in our geopolitical talks the current events, but nevertheless, we would like to discuss it in a broad context, and we would like to discuss the visit of Volodymyr Zelensky to the United States of America. But in fact, there are two parts. That is the UN, New York, and also General Assembly and all the meetings, and of course the visit to the US, which is mainly will be held in Washington, D.C. And the delegation, the bilateral meeting of the delegations would be held there. And at the same time, the Ramstein format is held in Germany, the 16th Ramstein, where the support to Ukraine is considered. And as today, the Minister of Defense in the open part has said, Mr. Lloyd Austin said that the three key questions are the anti-aircraft systems, the jets, and also the long resistance of Ukraine and support of Ukraine. And I think that all of these issues create a lot of questions, and we are not going to discuss the scenarios and when the hot phase of the war will finish, but today we're going to discuss the tools that can help to achieve peace or not help to achieve peace or might help to achieve peace, and the tools which can help Ukraine to become stronger in this war against the Russian Federation. The second part, that is the relations between Ukraine and the US, and of course that is a meeting with a key strategic partner. But today, just in a few hours, we will hear the speech of the President of the US, Joe Biden, and also the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky. And therefore, I would like to start with this topic, General Assembly and the UN, and what can we use as Ukraine, what is the destiny of all of these institutions, and also the best person to answer these questions in Ukraine is Volodymyr Yelchenko, the Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of Ukraine to the United States of America, and he was representing Ukraine for two cadences and the UN, and also he was twice the participant of the Security Council of the UN, and therefore, what is the UN reform? I guess he was listening to that for many years, but nevertheless, I think that even our commentators, geopoliticians, they do not feel some of the aspects of the work of this organization. And today we are not going to have a lecture on the work of the UN, but nevertheless, we would like to discuss the questions which are at most interesting for all of us now. So, Mr. Volodymyr, I would like to start with the question, not with the question on what Volodymyr Zelensky is going to tell or what the president of the US is going to say. Actually, I would like to ask about the key topic which we presented, the topic of this session. Everyone understand that the UN is in a deep crisis. This organization is, in my opinion, failed in security issues, but nevertheless, there is a desire to reanimate these component. First of all, the Security Council And we've heard the defense minister of Germany, and she was saying that, in fact, we have to relaunch this, restart this system. Maybe let's hear what the president of the U.S. will say. It seems like he wants to talk about the number of the members of the Security Council, which has to be increased, and also that is also another question is a veto. So not we will hear that soon. But what about you? What is your opinion? Can we talk about the reform of the Security Council of the United Nations, or it has to be to get the hard reset? Because I know that you were talking about that there are few approaches. So we will discuss the situation with the Russian Federation later. But what should we do with this institution, which is unfortunately not able to fulfill its role? Thank you. Let me start with the fact that when I had my first vacation, and I was a young diplomat at that time, and I went to the end from at that time, the Ukrainian Soviet Republic, and at that time we had the working group in the UN, and since that time this UN group works now. They are organizing the consultation on the reforms of the Security Council, but nevertheless, everyone can participate this group, and every time when the session of the General Assembly of the UN is open, so today it is going to be the 78th one, and at that time that was the 35th one or the 36th one, and on this day, when the leaders of the states are speaking, that is a third. They are speaking about the same thing. They are saying that the Security Council needs the reform because that is a key. So it's kind of so not only the UN and statute of the UN, but also those system of the collective. Of the joint security is signed, and this process was started in 1942 on the conference in Futon, and that was the idea of Churchill for policemen. Yes, and then there were a few other meetings, and now you can find a bit of this information because all of these things are left somewhere. Why there were 4 police, and the Security Council had five of them? Because France at that time was occupied. And I do not want to say anything bad about France, but many experts say that actually France did not deserve this place in the UN as a compensation for their suffering. And actually, the French people, they were fighting, not all of them, but they were fighting the fascism. But there were facts of collaborations and what we know from the history, but nevertheless, it was decided that France is a big country, a former metropole. At that time, it was metropole, in fact, empire, and it was decided that this country also deserves the membership in the UN. And at that time, in 1945, of course, when forming the statute of the UN, the founders of these organizations, they could never imagine that one of the constant members, and they actually gave this status to themselves, and they gave the veto right as the key leverage in case of any kind of threats. And these countries, these states got the super status. So that are the countries which have an impact on everything, and they are resolving all the international problems, and they would have never thought that one of them will not just abuse this power, but also will will express aggression towards the other country, and we are speaking of the Russian Federation. And the Russian Federation is talking about the US against Iran, and nevertheless, all of these things were the response to the invasions, and Serbia invaded their neighbors, and then we had the conflict in Kosovo. So that was the reaction, and therefore we cannot compare the aggression of the Russian Federation in Ukraine. I just do not even want to say the word aggression, but we cannot compare that to what the US did or the other cases, for example, the Chinese and Taiwan war. And at that time, China was criticized for invading Taiwan. But at that time, there were a bit different situations, and nobody would have ever thought that the constant member of the UN, of the Security Council of the UN, would become the aggressor itself. So that has already happened, and that happened much later. So I mean the aggression of the Russian Federation in Ukraine. But the first 50 years, the statute of the UN was working well, and we were managing to resolve the conflicts, and maybe if not to resolve them completely, but to stop the hot phase that was the Cyprus, the situation in Indonesia, and the other. And actually, dozens of conflicts in Africa, Kashmir, India, Pakistan, and we can continue this list, dozens of these kind of conflicts. And in fact, the Security Council of the UN and the system of the UN in general, they managed to find the leverages to stop this aggression. And as far as I remember, you went as a representative somewhere. Yes. When Ukraine was in the Security Council of the UN, I think that I visited the third part of the African countries, because there is a practice that the members of the council, they travel and they are looking what can be improved, what can be done, and Mali and Congo, Guinea-Bissau and Gambia and Senegal, so many countries. And not only Africa, but also the Middle East. Maybe I haven't been to Cyprus, but Haiti, Colombia, and the UN was doing something. Yes, they were managing to do something. For example, Colombian conflict, the internal one, we managed to resolve it, and we do remember that there were the issues with the drugs, but in fact, the UN was able to stop the civil war because that was a civil police mission, and they have just prepared the election, they organized everything. So in fact, they helped the government of Colombia. In Haiti, we also managed to stop the hot conflict, even though the country continues, as we know, suffering from poverty and so on. But actually, they did things well there. And what about Ukraine? All the countries are sovereign. All the countries, according to the statute, except for the Security Council, except for these special status. And now we face this kind of situation. The Russian Federation is equal among others, and what? And there is no solution except for some attempts to get broader against these kind of things. And here I would like to remind you of the second part. So what shall we do with the Russian Federation? We can make it bigger, we can make it smaller, but as the lawyer says, the Russian Federation got this place illegally and it stayed there. So the key question of the legitimacy is not resolved. Yes, of course. So I'd like to give you an example, the example in numbers. During all years of the UN and the Security Council, the former Soviet Union and the Russian Federation after it used to veto right as much as the other members in total. Not many people know that the first veto of the US in the Security Council happened in 1950. So 5 years after the UN was created. And during these 5 years, the Soviet Union used it 50 times. At that time, that was mainly about the new members in the UN, and the Security Council is working on that as well. So first they are suggesting, and then the General Assembly approves it. And at that time, the Soviet Union was voting against, as it was considered at the time, the countries were supporting Germany, and that was not only Germany, Japan, and Italy, but also the countries like Romania, Bulgaria, the Latin countries. So at that time, the UN had 52 countries which were founders, and then 5, 6, and the rest were blocked by the Soviet Union. Even at that time, the former Soviet Union was an obstacle for the normal function of the UN. So that is not a form of Russian Federation. I know that you are talking about that a lot. I would like to clarify that actually, what is actually surprising for me as a lawyer, as an international lawyer, that till now it is said not the wrong countries I mentioned. Instead of the People's Republic of China, which is founded in 1973 and 1971, which replaced Taiwan, which is called Chinese Republic. So in fact, the Chinese Republic in chapter 70 is written Chinese Republic. Then you have you can find the links which are not enemies to Japan and Germany. So it's not okay. If there was an organization, just a company, the business company, and if their basic documents, or for example NGO, if they were not meeting the reality, that would have been something horrible, because they would be urged to just change something. Because as far as I remember, how many these things were not. Every time it was mentioned, nobody wanted to work on that. And here we have two questions. The first question: what should we do with the Russian Federation? Because obviously they are not registered legally. And they are not the Southern Africa. They are not like Taiwan and China. They look like nothing. So they look like Russia. They captured, they raided, and they did not get the legal registration, and they are making the reference to the CIS resolution. So how do you consider this approach? So we should work on the documents. And then the second question: what is actually happening around? And as far as I remember, China and Russia, they wanted to get more members in the Security Council. And now even the US agreed for that, and they became the initiator for that. What has happened? So I would like to tell you a small secret. Between the active nuclear 5 or nuclear members of the Security Council, there have always been, maybe not that strong now, but still here there is a gentleman agreement that everything that can be against their interests, for example, losing the veto right or something other, they are as one front. So that means they are not divided into 3 and 2. I mean, like Russia, China, and the US, France, and Germany. And as they could not stop this discussion and the talks of which started in 1989, they decided that let's pretend that we are not against it, not to get the enemies. So I mean, like 188 countries, so -5. So it means that we do not want to have enemies there, and therefore the Russian Federation and China, they were always saying, yes, we are not against the new members of the Security Council, but it should be done very carefully, very thoughtfully, and let the regional groups decide themselves what members they would like to suggest. So it means that every regional group, that is Africa, Asia, Latin America, Western Europe, and also Eastern Europe. So let the African Union suggest their candidates, who they first will agree among them, who deserves for the constant membership in the Security Council of the UN, and the same concerns Asia and the rest. And to ever look at the map, Africa. So just try to choose the best countries between the southern Africa, Nigeria, Egypt, and let's say Ethiopia. We also have Kenya. So that are the countries which are considered. So I would doubt about Ethiopia, but the Chinese, but China are bringing Ethiopia to BRICS. So Ethiopia has the headquarters of Africa, and even though Ethiopia has constant issues with Eritrea, but nevertheless it is considered to be the important country. And we also have Angola, the rich Angola, Tunis, Algeria, Morocco. Algeria would have never allowed Morocco to join. Morocco would never allow Tunis to Algeria to join. And as for Egypt, Egypt has issues. Let's say so. It cannot be considered a neutral country. As for Nigeria, Nigeria is going to have the conflict. So, did they have the solution? Well, in fact, Biden has named the Southern African Republic. So I still do not understand why. Why the Southern African Republic? Not because they suggested the peace plan on Ukraine. Why not Nigeria? Why not Egypt? Well, maybe because the South African Republic wants to join another union, regional union, maybe. And what do we have here? So India and Pakistan. So I'm not even talking about Japan, about Indonesia, and so on. Latin America, which theoretically could have got one member. But there is Argentina and Mexico, and there is Brazil. And tell to them that Brazil is better than Mexico or Argentina. But that are just cosmetic things. But let's make it broader. I would like to understand, I would like to clarify. I would ask the direct question. Two thoughts on the initiative of Joseph Biden and the new members to the Security Council. The first thing is that some say that is initiative. They are trying to take initiative in their hands. And as for India, Japan, and all these countries of Latin America, and why the US didn't do that, they want to take initiatives in their hand, especially after G20 when China was not present. By the way, Xi Jinping is not going to be here as well. And who is going to visit it from the Security Council? Only Biden, and that's it. So what does it mean? And the other people say that is a first step to collapse. And in this process, they will get the solution on the Russian Federation, on more efficient work of the Security Council. And it's hard for me to imagine how the current administration of the US can work in this way, because I think they work in another way. But still, there is this kind of opinion. So they say that let's start the fight and then the Russian Federation will be trapped. Well, I think that both options are possible. I totally agree with you that the Americans wanted to take the initiative in their hands and to lead this initiative, because they were attacked for many years, because they are the less active in the issues of the reform of the Security Council, because the other countries like France, they were suggesting the reforms. So about, for example, collective veto, because one veto cannot be counted. Or, for example, Macron has repeated that the possibility to refuse from the right of veto. And Macron actually, as far as I remember, Macron has actually said that France is ready to refuse from their right for veto if the Russian Federation will fulfill all the obligations according to the statute of the UN. And of course, I can that are nice words, but I cannot understand how it can work. Yeah, but they actually started with a preamble, and in the preamble. It is actually very much damaged, and I'm not even talking about the rest of the article. And how can we talk about reforms in this kind of case? The basic question is not being resolved. The members of the Security Council members, they have violated all the principles of the UN, which are mentioned in the statute. And instead of expelling these members, especially we are saying that legally there are the reasons to expel the Russian Federation, and we can contact the committee which is responsible for the authority. But nevertheless, they are showing the picture that we are going to change something, because the Security Council could not change anything in Ukraine. What are they expecting? So I would like to continue my answer on the first question. Well, actually, they're related. And the second option is to start the discussion, which will lead to that end. That is also possible, because maybe that is the reason why Joe Biden has named the South African Republic, because in a few days you will hear what Nigeria and the rest of the country think about this state, and they will start fighting on who is the best one there. But I do not know about the Southern African Republic, about the others, but I have heard from the ambassadors in Japan and they said that these two countries will never agree, even if they would be forced to be the members of the UN without the veto right, because it is clear and it is understandable, and you cannot be half pregnant, because you cannot be the member without the veto right, because. And if I would tell you that about the ideas which were offered in this working group on the reform of the UN, and there was half membership and quasi membership, and the countries which would be selected more often and less often. So all of this is a dead end, and nothing will work out. And I'm absolutely sure, especially when there is lack of joint opinion and joint interest among these candidates, and especially when you have the aggression of the Russian Federation. And now you just can't organize one reform if one of these members has violated all the rules possible. What kind of reform are we talking about? The reform to keep the Russian Federation there, plus Germany and Japan, what it would be? And how beneficial? What is the benefit of it for the end? And there is another threat which already exists. The Security Council is not able to make the decision, and therefore the authorities are brought to another groups, NATO. And why it is a threat? Why do you consider that to be a threat? So that is one of the solutions. That is not the threat for us. That is the threat for the so-called global South, because they support the Russian narratives, because NATO was bombing Serbia because the Security Council was not able to make the decision. Well, in fact, if we consider the historical facts, and despite all these difficulties, Europe is stable. NATO countries, they are facing attacks, but they do not pay much attention. But nevertheless, they are controlling, they have the control. And even Serbia, which was bombed, there are different opinions. Some people want to get to the EU, some want to get to NATO, and actually the issue was resolved. And we cannot say the same about Uganda, Burundi, and Africa in general. So they were killing each other. With NATO or without. It's not about NATO, which is responsible for the Euro-Atlantic area, and maybe there would be some organization which would be responsible for Africa. Not there is a question on Africa. Africa is African Union, but still there is no this component. Or maybe, well, by the way, they have their own Security Council. That is a political council. So I mean the military contingent and they say that we can be responsible for the African countries and give us the weapon. Well, maybe we could have given them money, but we were given the weapon and there were issues. But well, okay, there is a book, The New Rules of War, of the American author. I know him personally. I'm not going to give him an ad, but there was a book fest, and everyone bought this book. And I've heard that in Washington, he is suggesting. Maybe you have never met him. That is a professor, and he is actually respected professor. He's suggesting non-interesting question. He is suggesting to hire mercenaries. So the African Union is hiring. You are giving the money, and the African Union is hiring mercenaries, and they do not care who they fight for them. And he said that the genocide in Burundi was stopped in this way. That is one of the solutions. So let's not discuss that because that is very controversial. But as for the pirates, I guess that you remember it when it was impossible to stop it, and when the UN did not allow to keep the weapon on the ships. I guess we both faced this during our work because Ukrainian sailors were captured and they had no weapon. And what was done? In the result of these, first of all, they hired the company, different companies, but the biggest one was the American one, BlackRock. And in fact, they had the machine guns, the nets, and they had the control on the movement, the means of communication, and they have closed everything. And what did the UN do? The Commission made the amends to their documents. And therefore, there is nothing impossible. But nevertheless, the key question, and you have studied it, so maybe the function of the Security Council of the UN will be divided between few regional organizations. Well, in fact, no institute of the UN there is. It is mentioned and it is working like this. So it was created in this way, so that the regional and sub-regional organizations such as African Union and NATO, or, for example, the League of African Countries or SAM, they would have complemented the implementation of these decisions made by the Council of the UN. So why? So if some military conflicts would wait for the UN to make the decision, that would have been a catastrophe. So what about Tamil Lama? Only by force. By the way, Sri Lanka really remembers who helped them and who helped them to do that. But that was horrible. Tamil Lama, they were forced. There was a special forces. Let's not mention the country, but that were the mercenaries from another country. So the country was providing, that was the Soviet Union, that we can say that in these ways. So they were providing the mercenaries, and for some reason they respect Russia. I don't know why. So everyone, all the Russian Federation decided to take the best one and leave the worst one for itself. So we can divide it in this way. NATO can control this area, and the UN can control another one. So yes, I agree with you. That can be the part of the future reform, and that is discussed and considered. But we need to start the process. And today, I can't say that these actionless state of the UN is okay for everyone. But actually, the UN is considered to be as a big donor, and in fact, the majority of funds for humanitarian aid and the other ones, and especially climate change aid or education reforms, everything goes from the UN budget. So all the countries pay some budget, and 80% of this money are going to the poorest countries of Africa, first of all, Latin America less because they have better situation, and South Eastern Asia. So in fact, this organization is okay for them because the war in Ukraine is very far from them, and they do not suffer directly from this war. Well, maybe only the questions of the grain, which have hurt already Africa, but that has no impact on the Pacific Ocean countries, and therefore they are ready to live with this organization how it is. But it is obvious that they are going to follow the general trend. And if Biden said that we need the reform, and they will say that and the American diplomats will start to work with these small countries which have one vote, which is also important as important as Chinese vote or voice or another, but they have no such big impact. And if, for example, France, the UK and the US decided to work with the entire world with these small countries, in this case, I think that in a few years they would have achieved this critical mass, the critical majority in General Assembly, 2/3 or more, to drop out Russia. Yes, and also to drop Russia. But there is the fear of this event. So if the Russian Federation would be expelled, and then China would be expelled because Uyghurs, or the US would be expelled because of the native Indians. And we are not saying that the Russian Federation will not come back. We are saying that it should not be allowed to be there because they have no legal registration in the Security Council. Because the Republic of Belarus, they have joined, and we do not have the Republic of Belarus, they registration, and we do not have the Soviet Belarus Republic. And this country, Russia, it has 3 different names. So nobody understands what kind of country is mentioned. The former Russian Soviet Republic, the Russian Federation of Russia. So that is actually strange because Putin has to apply and to join as the other countries did it. So why? It is so simple. A student of the first year of studies of the international law, so even the student can say that I read it clear. So there are the standards, there is a regulation, and you can turn it twice, you can turn it 3 times, but nevertheless it is written clear. There are clear rules how you can become the member of the Security Council, and that is the beginning of all the problems. If you are not legitimate and someone is listening to you, you are staying there and someone is listening to you. In this case, you start to feel yourself the master. And here we have the practical issues. So we have Russia, and Putin is not there, and he is not attending these meetings for a very long time. There was one time when he attended the General Assembly, I think it was 2015, and our representative of the UN worked well, and Ukraine got the first line. Well, actually, that was rotation, but we were lucky. But with the efforts, but you gain nothing without efforts. And when Putin came out, the delegation turned their backs to Putin and went away. And in this case, the Security Council would be there, and Lavrov would be there, and the president of Ukraine is going to attend. So here we have two very important questions. The delegation, delegation, probably has their vision, and the president has his vision. But nevertheless, if there is no level of presidents, well, Brazilian president is going to be, Brazil is not in the UN. Okay, so they are not going to be there. Okay, so I do not know who is going to be there on the Security Council. So Lavrov is going to be there, and the president of Ukraine is going to be there, and they are going to be, and he's going to sit in front of the war criminal. He is not only the war criminal, but also he has another status. He is a diplomat, and that is a propagandist. And by the way, the person who admitted the war crimes of the Russian Federation when he stated that they were bombing the maternity house in Mariupol. Well, the Vienna Conference is working, and 3 people are in touch, and it's still working. And here we have the question. Just your opinion. What would you do in this case? So we have the tribune of the Security Council, and there is also the General Assembly tribune, and the Security Council. Should the president participate the the Security Council, and where the war criminal is there? So it's very hard to answer this question when you're not in this kitchen, and I think that is a very big pain for the other delegation and other members of the members of the Security Council, not only our delegation. First of all, I've heard that some of the countries, they are afraid for it not to become not a fight, which is not going to happen, but to some kind of conflict, because it's going to be online, it's going to be live, and half of the world is going to watch it, at least half of the world. And of course, everyone wants to avoid that. And there are some certain behavioral rules, and even the war criminal is saying, I hope that Lavrov will not allow himself to be rude or to say something rude. Well, Ribbentrop was also quite polite. Well, of course, it will not save him, I mean, Lavrov, from the future trial. But nevertheless, as for the organization of the meeting, I think that our president is going to participate, even though officially it's not announced. We know that the Security Council is going to be held on Ukraine, but it is not said whether our president is going to be there. I'm not sure. Well, we know that Ukraine would be there, and the representative would be there, and we can choose who is going to be there. That could be the Minister of Foreign Affairs. So here the question is open. But as for the level, as the meeting is dedicated to Ukraine and not just to peace and safety of all world, and therefore the president will have the right to be the first one to read the speech. They can agree with Biden because he is also the member of the Security Council, and we are not. Maybe Biden would be the first, but that are the questions of the protocol and some certain traditions and some policies, and I do not think that there is going to be a problem. As typically, this kind of meeting is opened by the presidential, that is Albania, and maybe, by the way, their president can attend the meeting. And then the representative, not the representative, but the General Secretary of the UN will have the word, because that is a report on what the UN is doing. He has a brief speech, and then the rest. So Ukrainians have, yes, only you and those who have specific interest in that would watch it. But now I think many people would watch. So maybe there should be some kind of right when a rule that we do not that could work out. Well, actually, I was surprised, and I was mentioning that in my interviews and speeches, and everyone knows my position. Why, during all this time, more than 1 year and a half, there was no time when the thing which is not maybe that important, but that much evident as like something like boycott of banning blocking of the Russian representatives. We were doing that constantly when the Syria representative was reading the speech. We Chukin and Nibinse were staying, and me and Samantha Powers, Nikki Haley, and the ambassadors of the UK and some Western countries, Swiss. So they were just leaving from from the room, and that had a good impression because that was very much saying when you watch it on TV. Why nothing like that was doing. There were dozens of meetings dedicated to the situation of Ukraine, and nothing like that happened. And as for the Committee on the Authority, that is also the question for me. Why until now we are not initiating formally the request to this committee not to recognize the participation of the Russian Federation, just because since December 1991, for some reason, they take it illegally. So we have 9 countries, and they are changing. Yeah, they are changing, and there is some kind of balance. And this year, I did not count it, but in 2022, we had 6 votes. I do not remember the countries who voted for us, but that could have been the UK, the US, Japan, France, Swiss, and so 6 voices we got. And through this committee, 3 years, the Hungarian delegation was not recognized after 1996. And as for the Southern African Republic, you mentioned this option. There was another option. First, there was a General Assembly, which wrote a big resolution, also urging not to recognize the authority of this delegation. And later, there was a committee of on authorities, and they also said the same thing. So I think it lasted for 17 years until they didn't have the good elections, the proper elections. So there are lots of different options, but nevertheless, instead of bringing back the effective work to this institution, maybe after the General Assembly, that is a second institution, they are trying to reanimate this half-dead institute. So, well, when we are inside and when we are working with practical diplomacy, then yes, I do understand my the colleagues who are doing what they can do, so they can promote something. So for a diplomat, this small promotion, the legal one, or achievement, or like language, so that is a good sign. But nevertheless, it does not have an impact on Shaheds flying today in Lviv, yesterday the missiles, so it can have no influence. But the Tribunal for Lies for the Tribune of the International Organization, that is okay. So why don't we work more actively? Why are we not in the Committee on the Authorities? Why we are not suggesting something? I'm told that because our partners are not do not like that. Well, because the US representatives told me directly, and I think that's true, because I totally don't agree with that, but nevertheless, they can have their own opinion. Because if we will make the Russian Federation to leave the UN, it means that we will lose the platform where we can communicate with them. So now I have a question, but what about are you going to talk about? And who are you going to talk about? Yes, of course, there are some questions with the US, for the US and the Russian Federation, nuclear weapon and the rest, but we are not discussing that. So nothing. Mr. Benson can go to Moscow, and not only to Moscow, and have some secret meetings, and that is okay. Now it is called not the secret one, but it is called the second track, or the other situations which we heard about, but we have not much information. Therefore, the presence or absence of the Russian Federation on the European platforms will not be an obstacle, because who are they going to talk to, and what about are they going to talk to? About. Therefore, I do not share these concerns, but nevertheless, I think that we have to be more active. And what do I mean? I mean our diplomacy. Why? Because so what can we do? What tools can we use? We have to go and proceed, because we were not given javelins and the other weaponry. And therefore, I think that we can persuade in the rest of the things, so we can persuade our partners, because everything depends on them. If we persuade the UK and the US, I have never heard the arguments from the UK why they are against. So I think that when we hear that they are not against, but they are not fond of this idea, I think that maybe the wrong people talk to them, or maybe in the wrong way. So, okay, well, what I understood from what you've said, there is going to be no reform. Well, there is not going to be reform for sure, but the restart is possible. The liquidation of the UN is not going to happen. The UN is going to stay. There are the functions which the UN can perform and performs. So the critical decision on the liquidation of these institutions, I think that it's impossible, but just when you look from outside on the effectiveness, and you understand that some things can be improved, even though it is kind of weird, all these decisions about the food issues. Ukraine gave for free to Ethiopia the grain, and what Ethiopia did, they voted. They voted against. No, not against, but not for. So they were neutral. So I think that so there is no bond. Maybe that's good, because we can say that there are independent political decisions, but I think that who offered more to Ethiopia, who offered more the Russian Federation or Ukraine, those got their voice. So I do not like this kind of organization when you have to bargain on the vote. You have to exchange something. You have to give something. That is not the market. So what has this organization turned into? So we are exchanging the votes. I vote for you, you vote for me. That is okay. If we are talking about participation in some institutions, of course, we do understand that not everyone can participate at once. But then give me more money or weapons and I will vote for you. So we have this similar case when we managed to persuade some countries of CIS countries, and they supported Ukraine, and therefore they got some problems from Russia, from Moscow, but they tried to do it once. But what for do we need this kind of organization where you have to bargain who will pay more? And I wouldn't say it was huge. It's like 12, 15,000 people. But it's like, if we're talking about international organizations, that's not a big organization. But there are other organizations like FAO, Food and Agriculture Organization, and, well, I do not want to say something about their principles and how they work, who gets the orders and who gets the grain, how it works out. It's not transparent at all. And what about the equipment for the peacemaking operations? And what about the funds? So there are so many questions to this monster, which has the system of organization of the UN, UNESCO, MAGATE, and that are also organization of the UN, the system of the UN. And nobody is going to liquidate MAGATE, even though we hear the the cause to do that. So nevertheless, after discussion with you, I understood two things. The first one is that, as the classics of Ukrainian politics said, don't push it there, it will not get pushed inside. The Ukrainian will understand me, but as for our interpreters, I would explain that don't try to do something that cannot be done at all. So they will try, but it won't work out. Then we will have some kind of restart. I don't know why and how, and I do not know whether it will have an impact on the war of the Russian Federation in Ukraine. I don't know, but nevertheless, maybe that was not going to be reformed, but restart without the liquidation of the institution and the official bodies. And then we have the final question. So what do we need it for, this organization, except for Tribune? What can we do during the war, except for the membership in the UN? So there is the discussion of one topic, but there are 32 countries we joined. 32 countries have joined, and that is also the statute position, the International Court of the UN. So there is something positive, and we can use it, the Tribune. What else? Can you list what Ukraine needs? What organization from system of the UN are beneficial for Ukraine? What should the president of Ukraine emphasize during his visit? So first of all, I think not as a tribune, but as a platform, because in 2-3 days, you cannot meet 20 presidents in 2 or 3 days, starting with Botswana or Angola or Colombia or Brazil. So there is going to be Brazilian meeting, and also there is going to be a meeting with Israel, Poland. That is what we know for sure. So that is a platform which we should use to meet those countries which we cannot reach in the other ways. And we have things to discuss. I mean, the president of Ukraine, that is the food product, that is Africa, that is also the president of Brazil, and to persuade him that he is wrong with his peace plan, which is not even on Earth, but flying somewhere in the clouds. But also the meeting with the Mexican leader, and also there was, nobody noticed it, there was a plan which was offered by the Ministry of Defense of Indonesia. I guess it happened 3 months ago, and he thought that Ukrainian Soviet Republic has contributed a lot to Indonesia, and that's true. At that time, we were a Security Council. Magnitsky was in 1946, 1947 was in this council, and then the decision on Indonesia was made, and Silitsky, I couldn't find any information, but some people say that he himself wrote the project of resolution of the Security Council of the UN, which appeared to be the consensus, and Indonesia became independent. That is the biggest Muslim country, and the Minister of Defense of Indonesia remembered that, and they said that they are ready to give their active peacemaker. They have a strong army. They have it is present in many countries. They wanted to bring it to Donbass, to put it there, and the thing is that only the Security Council has to sign it, and that's it. Anyway, I hope that he was honest when making that, unlike the Brazilian president who just said something about the southern conflict. Well, that is a good offer. I'm not saying on how can it be used, but we have to remember that Indonesia can provide these peacemaker. That is not the best, the worst solution, because not every country is ready to do that with this number of peacemakers, and we have to remember that, because who knows how everything will work out later, because maybe we will need the peacemakers in the Russian Federation because of the conflicts on our eastern borders. Everything is possible. So first of all, we have to continue using this organization as a platform, and second of all, we there are lots of agencies of the system of the UN which are actually very useful. For example, there is the issue which is still not completely implemented. ICAO, that is the organization of the civil migration, that was the first organization which expelled from their Security Council, that is they have their council, they expelled the Russian Federation. They have just voted and they expelled. And the Russian Federation is not ICAO, is not the member of ICAO. So I'm going to show, and I will complement what you've said, and I will explain how it works out. So you can give the task to different embassies. So I'm not going to confront it. So you can create the audio guide. So that is a system work. So we give the audio guide for these countries, and at the same. And I remember that we had a similar situation when Kiev had to be written with the Y, and every ambassador was reporting if he managed to achieve some results in the airport to get even one airport, not all the airports, but even one airport. And when he was achieving something, he was taking the picture, and it was shown as a big achievement. And then we remembered ICAO, and it's good that the representative of ICAO called me and said that in Washington there is the main structure, and I was surprised, the main structure on geographical toponyms, and it belongs to the US, not the world, but the US. And that is so-called the Commission on Geographical Names, and in fact this commission decides on the names of Beijing, or the names of the countries, on the names of the island. So the same story we had, and I really appreciate our colleagues, our ambassadors, and our system. And we did not 7 or 10 years, but we needed 2.5 months for this commission to make the solution on the new transliteration. And why it is so important? Because transported in the planes, they have 3 letters and they are different, and that are big muddy, in fact, and there is no company which wants to do that. But when there was a decision and ICAO made this decision, the Russian Federation, if the Russian Federation would have been there, they would have blocked it. But they were expelled, and they have cleaned it on the medium level. And at that time, so I remember that, as I mentioned that as an example, but in fact, there was another solution of this ICAO commission, and they have wrote the recommendation letter to the Security Council of the UN with the request or the recommendation to consider the issue of broadening the to be able to block the plane movement and to make it through the Security Council. And when they said that it's impossible because the Russian Federation is here, then ICAO Council, they made the decision themselves, and that was the beginning of this banning of Boeing flying to the Russian Federation. And that is important. MAGATE, Interpol, with all the critics, Interpol, it's not the UN. By the way, there is an international tourist organization in Madrid which also expelled the Russian Federation. So there are some organizations. Yes, okay, we need to preserve it. And so you think that you preserve the UN, you did not reform it, but at least you preserved it. And as for a Security Council, I think that it's not going to be as simple as with the UN itself. And here we have another thing. You said that that our partners are not helping us immediately on in our initiatives. And actually, Ukraine is a very initiative country, and the president of Ukraine was actually saying that. And at that time, it didn't change much, but the water destroys the cliffs. And I do not know about your practice, but in my practice during the years of communication between in relations of Ukraine with the US or Ukraine, the UK, Ukraine, France, in the end, in the cities of the leaders of the states, there was the cooperation of the states. Somewhere it is considered that you have to mention that, but in fact. You have to read it when you have time. We can discuss it. But I think that is also one of the reasons, because the attitude of the countries, well, in New York, we have to start the discussion from this, and even with Biden. So there are the questions of the weapon and the rest, but if we will have the meeting in Washington, D.C., because I've heard that the meeting might be held in New York, so just logistically. According to the information we have now, on the 21st, this meeting would be held, and before that, there would be the meeting with the senators. As well, I think that, in fact, that is a good thing that it's going to happen in Washington, D.C. There is going to be more attention in Washington, because in New York, where there are so many leaders, in New York, maybe because that is American delegation where you can sit in a separate room. But if we are talking about the other meetings, in fact, you understand that you know it even better than I do, that are the small rooms without confidentiality. And by the way, that is also a question which was also always surprising for me. All the delegations are so fond of this possibility to talk, but maybe to drink the tea and to discuss everything. But actually, to finish the agenda, it is actually important when you're preparing the meetings and you are preparing the documents. So they are just sitting back to back with the same wall, and they are discussing. So in fact, that is a Klondike for the spies. I guess every delegation was trying to protect themselves, but the UN did not pay any attention to that, and that is, I think, the reason why it is better to meet in the White House. That is the first reason. So coming back to the White House and to the relations between the US and Ukraine and the visit to Washington, D.C., well, I think that, in fact, the White House is not only the confidential place to meet, and besides, I think that the recordings of the meetings between the former Ukrainian president and the former president of the US were published, and the presidents were actually surprised with that. But in fact, I share this feeling, because it's strange when the confidential discussion is published by one of the presidents, and that was during Trump's cadency. And I hope that we worked with this administration when Joseph Biden was vice president, and therefore the meeting was already held in Washington, D.C., and now it is a very important place for the delegation to discuss all the topics. And I think that the new representative on the reforms or the support to Ukraine or renovation of Ukraine, Penny Fitzgerald, she is going to participate. And even though I do not know who is going to be in the American delegation, but nevertheless, I think that the advisor on the national security and the deputy of state secretary and the minister, and the one who is going to represent the military sector, and that might be even the new commander of the joint. Or maybe that would be Milley. I guess Milley is going to participate. Most likely Milley. The Americans, unlike Ukrainians, they are more precise about the protocols. And in Ukraine, that can be like the good person is leading the good discussion, even though this person is the head of the fund of the state fund. So and now the current minister of and now he looks good in Ramstein, and he is discussing the situation in Ukraine. But it is not okay when the head of the state assets fund is representing Ukraine in Saudi Arabia. And a few words about Washington, if you don't mind, because that is going to be brief, not that long as about the UN, because the UN, the meeting, you would be able to listen to the speeches in a few hours, and Washington would be a bit later. It is not less important, taking account the situation which is unfolding now. Everyone understands that the scale of support from the United States and the technological aspect of this weapon can have a big impact on this situation. Not maybe tomorrow, but it will be useful during autumn and winter. And therefore, all of us expect, and I'm telling my opinion, I would have been surprised if the atomics would not be provided. It's not the high if the far distance missiles, so our Neptune missiles are very efficient, but Atomax is another type of the missile. Of course, we have also HIMARS, so to launch it, but that is just the issue which is. And we do not know what kind of modification we will get. Yeah, there is a question, but nevertheless, I think that the one which will be able to stroke the further distances and not those modifications which are more than the distance which is considered by the US. So they are using the pencil, and when they see that the pencil is around former Ukrainian territories, Kuban, they are, for some reason, they are just decreasing this distance. So I hope that is they will stop thinking in this way, because the State Secretary Blinken has made a very interesting statement. By the way, together with Elena Benberg, so they said that the ATACMS and Taurus missiles, the decision on their provision is not there, but now they will not tell Ukraine how to use it. And I think that technologically, so they want to technologically change something on Taurus and ATACMS as well. But nevertheless, our militaries will bring it back. I remember the case with, so now we can say, with those radars, counter batteries, and the Americans were trying to reduce the range. Our defenders were putting them on the high positions, on the high hills, and they were able to reach what they needed. So you should not play with that. That is a time to join resources. Ukraine, its resources, the US, its resources, and maybe Joseph Biden will have a meeting on the General Assembly and also the President of Ukraine, and we need to concentrate all these resources now and not to make these last for long years, because I'm concerned about the statements which we can hear now about the long war, about the long resistance. Well, it all depends on you, not only Ukraine, but also all of you. And it is obvious that in the US it is important moment now, because they are close to the elections, and beside that, the elections are going to happen in two countries. In Ukraine, it is in mind, there is the statement of the civil society and the assessments, but we decided that we will postpone the elections. But in the US, I would say that that is kind of the beginning of the campaign, when the funds are collected, gathered, and the primaries are prepared. And I can see that Joseph Biden has placed agitation clip on Joseph Biden, how he performs in Ukraine, that he is taking the leader's position. So logically, to get the additional missiles and to provide the financing of Ukraine in the framework of the package of 24 billions, let's say for Ukraine, but actually for all this sector, that is also important. And then to discuss the financial tools for the next year, because there are questions and mostly people are making the plans for summer. Somewhere American companies think that in summer the situation will change with the situation with a full-scale war, that there would be the conflict, but the scale would be different, and we can start thinking about investment. And by the way, that is also very interesting. And here I would like to emphasize, and that is also a very important message. It is very important for the president of Ukraine to raise publicly the question of the Ukrainian membership in the EU. Publicly, not in private discussion, but publicly, for us to hear the position of the President of the US, Joseph Biden. Ukraine without the umbrella of security, in any case, is in a very vulnerable position. We were discussing today that the Security Council is not going to help us, and it's unlikely that any changes will lead to some positive situation for Ukraine. And if Ukraine is not invited to NATO, in some cases that can be some postponed conditions and terms, and including maybe the war, the end of the war, but the political decision has to be made in the US on the meeting of NATO. Otherwise, we can miss this moment. And in this case, I do not know how we can provide security in this area. And as for the bilateral agreement, as far as I understand about the joint security, Ukraine did not offer. We were offering it before, but now the draft is on the Security Council. So in fact, they call it in this way, in the office of the president, to enhance the weapon provision, the development of the industry. But the only thing is it is going to be sustainable. That is the guarantee of security, but that is not absolutely correct. And I would say that it's absolutely not correct. And therefore, I think that in this situation, we won't have the bilateral agreement on the joint security. And I don't think that without being the member of NATO, we will be able to protect ourselves in the near future. And maybe someone would say that it's not the time to discuss NATO, but look, in Vilnius, how much time has gone? It was like yesterday, but we should not miss this last carrier of this train which is leaving from Ukraine. And I'm looking at the situation, and by the way, that is another question. There is a meeting in the UN, our neighbors. It seemed to be everything is fine, but there are elections in Slovakia, in Poland, and the situation can go both ways, and nobody gives any guarantees, even though the nations stated their position. And it's good that this meeting would be after the meeting of the President of the UN with the Central Asian Five. So that this meeting is going to be held, and I read that it's going to be in Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan. Yes, 5 of them. So anyway, they are Crimea. So anyway, everything depends on the Russian Federation. Yeah, there are neutral countries, but nevertheless, all of them depend on the Russian Federation. But nevertheless, I remember that. By the way, a very interesting case with Turkmenistan. Boris Nemtsov, we know for sure that he was killed, and he was actually killed by those people who are in charge of the state now. And I remember that we were on the same TV program in Kiev, and he said that don't think that Putin is a patriot of Russia. In fact, he changed Turkmenistan. He gave Turkmenistan, all the Russian-speaking people in Turkmenistan, on gas and the possibility to get the income. And that is what has happened. The northern part of Turkmenistan, where the Russian-speaking people live, they are not Russian-speaking anymore. How much time have passed? Not that much. And that actually shows that we might be wrong about the motivation of the Russian Federation, and the US might be wrong. And the key thing for the president of Ukraine is to explain once again in vis-a-vis or with the delegation to explain that you are not able to change the Russian Federation, to teach them, to tell them that don't do that again. That's not going to work out. It starts from Truman doctrine. When Roosevelt was suggesting and he was offering for a police officer, that was all happening in one context. So there is a system, and of B can some way consider they thought that it was right, but nevertheless they were cutting the world. Every country was cutting the world as they wanted, both the Soviet Union and Great Britain and the US, and they are hero now. But the heroes are the nations which resisted, and the leaders were cutting the world as they wanted. And Roosevelt, at that time, he saw another conception. He said that those who is going to violate this concept of so those people who are going to violate the principles, so we are going to not allow them to do that. And Truman, who was a vice president of during the Roosevelt's cadency, and Stalin actually helped him to write the doctrine. Stalin did not understand what are these discussions about, why Parliament has to be democratic. So they have shared it. Why he should consider whether Masaryk was killed or not. Who cares? It's not your area. And that are exactly the words of Putin. Just read the memories, and just compare Putin and Stalin. It's very same, and even the Truman's doctrine is the very same. Was it effective? I have to admit that it was effective after 40 years, and we do not have 40 years. We do not have 40 years. This option is not for us. We have to resolve this situation now, as we did with Hitler and the fascist Germany. And therefore, I think that it is important to talk honestly, because there is a big risk that the big part of this discussion is going to be about the internal situation in Ukraine and in the US. I do not want to dig deep about what internal issues they are going to discuss, but the relations between Ukraine and the US improved, and Russia has helped it when they were intruding the elections in the US, and when they did this special operation. And now we will have another wave, and that is going to be something familiar for us, and they are going to involve the procedure of impeachment of Joe Biden. They are going to raise the questions of China, Russia, and Ukraine, and I do not want these to steal attention from the key questions, and because we would like to discuss them and we would like to resolve the question about the weapons and support, and of course renovation. And here I would like to say that I actually wanted to ask you, because what kind of ideas can be used? So I think that I know that in the president's program, as far as I know, he's not going to be to visit West Point and the Navy Academy in Annapolis, and he is not going to lay the flowers to McCain, Senator monument, who saw KGB in Putin's eyes, and he named this country the petrol station. Well, actually, he was right, and we can see that now. So it would have been correct if he would express his gratitude to the person who contributed so much. And I wish he could talk to NASA, because what is your opinion about that? I wanted to ask you about the meeting with NASA, whether we should organize it or not, and what else would you suggest? Well, I didn't hear anything about NASA. Well, I also didn't hear, but when Elon Musk was doing something, he was switching off something. So I'm just joking about him just switching off in his room. So Elon Musk met Erdogan somewhere there, and the Republic of Turkey is suggesting their Cosmoblock. And if the Republic of Turkey has something in common with Elon Musk, then of course we also have some, not only about Starlinks and the others, because we continue launching the American satellites, but that is not Elon Musk, but that are American ones. That was happening when we were working. No, that now it is over. So the launch was successful and it was over. So they are using not only their engineering, they refused from the Russian engines, but also they refused from the Ukrainian parts, and therefore we lost a big piece of the American market, which was given a lot of working places into Ukrainian companies. And as for the weird people who offered us the satellite for 60 million, that is a bit different. But we were collecting money, and I was also donating money, and therefore I can say this. And now it appeared to be that, as far as I understood, that is, dear Polikov, he said that it was just 1 year rent. And if you want more, just collect more money. And therefore, I think that we can discuss with NASA not only about these kind of things like satellites, the control from the side of the USA, but about other things as well. So we are participating the moon projects. Yeah, we have the joint programs. What else? Well, for me, it's still a secret. I was partially trying to get engaged, even though I was not asked to do that. The traditional meeting with American business, and there were some kind of issues. So whether you should meet these or those. But in the context of Peace-Kit, I think that we could have done some joint meeting, not just business, and listen of about Boeing problems, Westinghouse and the others, and these problems are going to be resolved during the next 45 years. But in the context of the participation of the American companies, not only in reconstruction or the reconstruction which will happen after the war, but even about energy system. Everyone is saying that they are going to attack the energy system, but Westinghouse and the others, I'm sure that they have an interest, and I'm sure there are the issues, and they are supplying something to us, but we just do not know because that is a closed information. Well, I do agree with you. The stability of energy system is very important, even at least in this sector. Well, actually, we started the production of small nuclear reactors, and we replaced the fuel on our stations, and also, as far as I remember, that was an evening cover. I think that even on those reactors we have replaced with American Westinghouse. The company is registered in the US, but it means that there is something we're working on. But nevertheless, you said a very important thing. We are going to wait for 30 years or even more. So yes, finishing our meeting, I would say a few words on the relations between Ukraine and the US. Even when we're talking about the war, the joint war, because it is written in the strategy of the US and also in Ukraine that the Russian Federation is an enemy. And nevertheless, so we cannot push on this relation, on the alliance relations. I mean, the agreement on the security. So there are different types of agreements. They include some packages, or the short agreement as it is, as they have with Japan or South Korea. They have a very big document, and it was really enhanced after the visit of Joseph Biden and the nuclear weapon. And there is a phrase which says the state that they are going to protect with a nuclear weapon. We do not have anything like that. And we do not want this visit to get finished with information about dozens of attacks and 31 Jaguar APCs. And when it is said that we have to appreciate, we not only appreciate, but we do understand that without the US, without the key countries, without G7, first of all, because they are the biggest economies and they helped the most to the European Union and some separate countries of the European Union, Japan and also Australia. Without all of these countries, we wouldn't be so efficient to stop the nuclear state as we are doing it now, because it would have been impossible. So that doesn't mean that we wouldn't protect our country. We would do that, but the effectiveness and the time would be different. And therefore, I would like to hear, and sometimes it is said, why you didn't do that before me? Someone is asking me, why you didn't do that? You were the ambassador. Why you didn't do something? What do you want from Zelensky now? The conditions, the agreement are changed when we needed to get the new weaponry, and now the war is opening the new possibilities. So we need to put to have higher tasks, more complicated tasks. If we didn't have javelins, we wouldn't have the discussions about F-16. I would even tell you more. And if after 2019 some things which on the helicopters, so I would tell what is open. The Patriot systems, the Zelensky was saying to Trump in the first discussion, and I really appreciate Zelensky that he raised this question before in advance, and for some reason both sides got cold regarding this question, and for 2 years there was a long pause, and right before the full-scale invasion they raised this question again. And therefore, not to repeat this mistake, our cooperation with the US has to be institutionally, officially organized, and I would have organized this. We have the heart of the partnership. Why chart of partnership? Why should we record the minutes and all the agreements? So it was regular, and we made it regular again, and now there is the commission of the partnership, and I think that the head of the minister of the international affairs is the head of it. So okay, raise it to the level of vice presidents of the country and the US, of Ukraine and the US. Well, I think that the president can resolve it. So I think that we have to do something. We have to organize commissions. And finishing our meeting, thank you, Mr. Volodymyr. Thank you for this 1.5 hours. And we can talk about these topics endlessly, but the key conclusions were made, and I think that I do understand now what do we need to spend time for and what is not worth our time. So this time on the General Assembly, there are not going to be 4 people from the security, 4 members of the Security Council. They were ignoring this meeting before, and that is the attitude to the organization, and that is the desire of China to add to BRICS 6 more countries. So they are doing something fragmental, and whether UN wants it or not, it will remain the platform, because Maveriky is there, because even though Maveriky was inviting us for G20. And I think that the platform would be there, but whether we will see the effective mechanism, I think that we won't. Do you agree with that? Yes. So what do we need? We need NATO. Yes. Maybe we have to take into account all the bases of the UN on security, maybe some elements of the institution involved, for example, ICAO. Therefore, I cannot see OSCE in this organization. There is another problem, and we have forgotten about it. Well, there are some coincidences. On the one hand, that are the worst time for the UN as an institution at the global situation, but also there is another issue. I guess that is the weakest general secretary of this organization, and we are going to because a lot of things would have depended on his activities, and he should have become the leader in this question. And Mr. Gutierrez is a very good leader in grain deals. So that is the first thing. And you remember when he came here the first time? By the way, before that, he did not attend Ukraine. When we were asking about the peacemakers, he did nothing. He did nothing to start this process, at least to start, and he did nothing. But when it was even when the invasion started, he came here and under the shellings. I do remember Kiev was under shellings. He was met by the members of the Security Council. The hotel was shelled, and for some reason, he is again pushing away the security issues, and now he is again providing the bread to the African children. Of course, it is also very important, but without security, there is not going to be any bread. So let's finish on that. The leadership is important, and I think that not only in General Assembly, but the UN is a kind of institution where we select someone when they get the agreement of all the countries. So let's hope that the leadership in the countries, in the members of the UN and the NATO members, and this visit of the President of Zelensky to the US to General Assembly and the White House, a meeting in Senate, and other meetings would bring more attention, would draw more attention to the war, which is the biggest threat, in my opinion, the Russian aggression against Ukraine. And of course, that is, and I guess UN and the US, the US has actually one of the president of the US has stated that why the US president don't want to stay in history when Ukraine will become the member of NATO, and then in this case you can forget about the failure in the UN reforming. So today we had a bit even broader discussion that we have now, even though there are so many questions left. Thank you very much. Thank you for your attention. You were listening to us very carefully, and now we can move to following the practical politics and on how our forecasts are becoming realities. Thank you very much, and see you on the next Geopolitical Talks.